This will sound very strange, but the famous actor Sean Connery was 007 James Bond, as well as the voice of the dragon in the movie Dragonheart, and starred in the movie The Rock. And Sean Connery's acting career is a prophecy that is predicting that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash that will be caused due to a bird strike in Columbia, South Carolina, on precisely June 10th, 2022. After Harris's death, she will be replaced by Michelle Obama, and Michelle Obama will be replaced by Barack Obama in October 2022. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, as does this timestamped email and forensic notes PDF. If you are skeptical, please email me and I will forward these to you. It has been known since the autumn of 2020 that she will die in a plane crash. But as can be seen here in this email, it was known since August of 2021 that God was pointing to the date January 14th, 2022, in regards to Harris's death in a plane crash. The majority of this video was produced before January 14th, 2022. Prior to January 14th, 2022, the Lord was pointing to this date with an overwhelming amount of evidence through connections to other signs that involved symbolism for the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash, which is why prior to January 14th, 2022, it was assumed that this would be the day that Kamala Harris would die in a plane crash due to a bird strike. However, instead, it turned out that January 14th, 2022 was a day of prophetic signs that confirmed all of the analysis of the signs and connections that were pointing to January 14th in regards to the death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash. It turned out that January 14th was another important step in the trail of signs that is ultimately leading to the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. Prior to January 14th, 2022, I had learned that God was also pointing to June 7th. One reason being is that it is 144 days after January 14th. I knew that if January 14th were not to be the day that Harris would die in a plane crash, then it would be expected that there would be a prophetic sign involving the number 144 on January 14th. Sure enough, we received an amazing prophetic sign involving the number 144 on January 14th, as was expected in advance. This prophetic sign involved 144 horses. The explanation of this prophetic sign, other signs that occurred on January 14th, and many other extremely profound things are explained in the must-watch American Pharaoh prophecy video. The American Pharaoh prophecy video should be watched before watching any of the other videos that are predicting Harris's death in a plane crash. I recommend pausing this video here and watching the American Pharaoh prophecy video, and then returning to this video. The American Pharaoh prophecy video will also explain the prophetic signs received on June 7th that revealed that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in Columbia, South Carolina on June 10th. In the description box below this video, I will leave a link to the American Pharaoh prophecy video. Once this prediction for Kamala Harris's death in a plane crash in Columbia, South Carolina due to a bird strike on June 10th comes to pass, you should know that you should watch every minute of every video on this channel. However, time is short, and so I will leave a list on my website of the most important videos. The rest of this video will be an explanation for the trail of signs in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections that were leading and pointing to January 14th, 2022. I will not edit the rest of this video that was produced before January 14th. Instead, I will leave this video the way it is. Again, the explanation for how January 14th is pointing to June 7th and June 10th, is explained in the must-watch American Pharaoh prophecy video. The rest of this video will explain the amazing and very important information regarding God's big picture of signs that were pointing to January 14th. God is telling many stories through his signs, which is why all of the videos on this channel should be watched. The reason God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that everything that I am saying in this video is true. Proving all of the main conclusions in this video is the purpose for God giving this prediction in this video. To not appreciate this is to miss the point of this video, and not appreciating this is to miss the point of this channel. In other words, this is a serious warning for those that disagree with the things being stated in this video. All right, through the death of Sean Connery, God is demonstrating a really amazing story, as I will explain in this video. God was heavily pointing to June 8th ahead of time. What is shown in this diagram is just a small sample of it. On June 8th, Kamala Harris was on her trip to investigate the supposed source of the border wall of security crisis. And America's border wall of security symbolizes and the walls of security collapsing on the ancient city of Jericho in judgment from God. And this is why Trump, God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet his signs, his presidency was synonymous with his border wall of security, because the Hebrews blew trumpets before the walls of security collapsed in judgment. And the true source of the border wall of security crisis, in fact, is America's rejection of God. On this trip on June 8th, well, her trip began with her having to make an emergency return landing to Washington after her plane landing wheel malfunctioned. And that was symbolic of her dying in a plane crash. And on June 8th, she was in Mexico. And the big news story of the day was her snide remark to the reporter that asked her why she hadn't been to the border wall of security yet. To which she replied, she hadn't yet been to Europe either, so what's your point? And this was really bad for her image. It was the biggest news story of her trip. And also, at the same time in that press conference, she announced that the U.S. would be donating 25 million doses of the VACCINE, which is the mark of the Antichrist. And this was also symbolic of the 25th Amendment that will be used after her death in a plane crash to appoint Barack Obama, the Antichrist, to replace her. But also on June 8th, actually it was June 7th, the day before, that the White House press corps plane on its way to Europe before taking off from Washington experienced a swarm of cicadas in its engine, which delayed its takeoff. And this was symbolic of the bird strike that will strike Kamala Harris's plane engine that will cause her crash. On June 8th, Biden, the news story was Biden and the cicada that it smacked into his neck as he was boarding his plane for Europe, which tied into Kamala Harris's snide remark about going to Europe. And so that was the amazing signs we received on June 8th. June 8th, 2021 was 220 days, is exactly 220 days before the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. And June 8th was also exactly 220 days after the day that Sean Connery died at the age of 90. This is absolutely stunning because Sean Connery starred in the movie named The Rock, and the number 220 symbolizes rock, which symbolizes Jesus. This is why, for example, the rock that fell from the Western Wall on the 9th of Av in 2018 was 220 pounds, and why the meteor that flew over the arch in St. Louis, the gateway to the west, was also 220 pounds. The path of this meteor traced exactly the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse Judgment Warning sign, And in the Bible, judgment begins symbolically at the gates of the city. And this is the symbolism contained in the signs in St. Louis, the gateway to the west. The reason why the number 220 symbolizes rock is because G220, the 220th word in the Greek New Testament, is the word for rooster, and the rooster is the symbol for Peter. In the 9th century, the Pope made it mandatory that on top of all cathedrals was placed a rooster. Before the rooster crowed twice, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Jesus gave Simon the name Peter after Peter had answered his question as to who they believed that he is. Simon said that Jesus was the Christ, the Messiah, and then Jesus said he would build his church on this rock. The word for rock in this context is the word Petra, the feminine version of the word, which refers to bedrock, which would be something one would build something on, a foundation of bedrock. Jesus was telling Peter that the truth that he had just stated, that he is the Christ, is the foundation that he would build his church on. Unfortunately, Catholics and the Catholic religion twists this one verse to imply that Jesus said he was going to build his church on Peter, a man, which is actually blasphemy. Just a few verses later in the same chapter, Jesus called Peter Satan. It doesn't make sense that Jesus would say he was going to build his church on Peter and then shortly after call him Satan. But the entire Catholic religion and theology hinges on this one verse in the Bible, because they claim to get the authority to create their man-made traditions on top of the Bible through their assertion that the popes are descendants of Peter. Peter was never in Rome, and furthermore, there were multiple popes at certain times in history, and there wasn't always popes from the very beginning, etc. However, this isn't what Jesus said. He said he was going to build his church on Petra, bedrock, and he called Simon Petros, Peter. This is important information, especially if you know a Catholic or you are Catholic, because Pope Francis is the Antichrist, and this prediction in this video proves this, because God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections is being explained on this channel, and the big picture of signs explained on this channel overwhelmingly demonstrates through God's signs that Pope Francis is the first Antichrist. And furthermore, there are many Bible prophecy passages that also clearly demonstrate that the Pope is the Antichrist. In other words, Catholicism is not a legitimate denomination of Christianity. Many people that aren't Catholic are confused about that as well. But if you know a Catholic, or you are a Catholic, or if you know a Catholic, memorize what I just told you, because that one verse demonstrates that the Catholic religion isn't true. Their whole entire religion hinges on that one verse. And Catholicism is the wolf in sheep's clothing. And Catholics, as will every Christian, will be severely tested in the end times through the Catholic system. True followers of Jesus are going to be forced to leave the Catholic tradition or make a choice and remain with it and go to hell. And so it's very serious. The Pope is going to announce that aliens have made him ambassador of the world. Aliens are, of course, demons masquerading as aliens. The Catholic Church is filled with supernatural experiences. They are also demonic deception. And I believe that there will be a massive Mary apparition in the end times that will fool many people in the world. And this is also demonic. All Mary apparitions in history have been demonic. All you need to do is read what they say, the quotes of what they have said. And if you understand the gospel, you will know that this is anti-Christian, all of the things that the Mary apparitions supposedly say. Another couple quick things about the number 220. There were 2 towers on 9/11 that collapsed, and each were 110 stories high. And it is a mystery, but the 2 numbers that refer to the end times and the Antichrist in Daniel chapter 8, 1,150 and 2,300, If we add 110 and 220 to those numbers respectively, we get the other two numbers that symbolize the end times period, which is 1,260 and 2,520. When Kamala Harris dies in her plane crash, she will then be replaced with the Antichrist, and judgment is really going to get going on America. And that's why God is communicating that she will die in her plane 2 sets of 220 days after Sean Connery died, who starred in the movie The Rock. 2 sets of 220 is 440, and in the Bible, the 440th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word for live, hot, burning coal of fire, which would symbolize a meteor or an asteroid, and again the meteor that flew over St. Louis on an extremely important date in God's signs, 11/11/2019, a date which contained and occurred many amazing, profound signs, and connected with many other profound signs, including 188 days exactly to another St. Louis sign, and the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word woe! And traced exactly the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse was 220 pounds. And again, the rock that fell from the Western Wall on the 9th of Av was also 220 pounds. And so we have 220 associated with rock. And in the Bible, 440 is associated with a live, hot, burning coal of fire, which would symbolize the big rock from the sky that will be catastrophic and a big part of the end times judgment from God. I will have more to explain regarding this in future videos, but I believe the evidence is overwhelming that this asteroid, the description in Revelation chapter 8, this asteroid hit should occur on September 24th, 2022, right before the resurrection rapture event on the Feast of Trumpets, September 26th, 2022. Now, Sean Connery also starred or was the voice of the dragon in the movie Dragonheart. Sean Connery died at the age of 90, and this was 90 days after SpaceX's first Dragon crew splashed down in their Dragon capsule. This symbolized Revelation chapter 12, when the dragon is thrown down from heaven to earth. This Dragon capsule with its Dragon crew came down from the second heaven, outer space, and splashed down on earth. From the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes judgment, and it is one of the 3 most important numbers God uses profusely in his end times big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. And the number 90 symbolizes the number 9. It is in Genesis chapter 9 that God established his covenant with man regarding judgment. And in Luke 17:17, Jesus said, "Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9?" This was after he cleansed 10 lepers, and only one of them thanked Jesus, falling on his face at Jesus' feet. The one that thanked him was the Samaritan. That's why Jesus went on to say, "Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" What Jesus was doing here was passing judgment on Israel. And that's why it was 9 Jews that didn't thank him and the 1 Samaritan did. What I find interesting about that as well is that the 9 that are mentioned in this passage is passage 17:17. And God pairs the numbers 9 and 17 frequently in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. And for example, 90 days before this Dragon's crew splashed down was the day that coach Don Shula died at the age of 90. Don Shula was the winningest coach in NFL history, and his 1973 Dolphins team was the only NFL team to have an undefeated season. Barack Obama hosted the Dolphins at the White House, as he does with championship teams, but he wanted to do this for this 1973 team after he had done it for his 1985 Bears team. And that's another story that's explained in the must-watch Super Bowl video. The point here being is that I have watched many of Barack Obama's White House videos with his sports teams visiting him. Many of them are prophetic signs. And this is the only one to my knowledge that is an exact number of minutes. It is exactly 9 minutes, this Obama White House video on YouTube, with this undefeated Dolphins. The Dolphins went undefeated for 17 games. This was a pairing of the numbers 9 and 17 together, and God pairs the numbers 9 and 17 together, for one thing, to point to and reveal the identity of the Antichrist, Barack Obama, who was president from 2009 until 2017. He also arrived in Washington, D.C. as the senator from Illinois in the 109th Congress and will return as the president in the 117th Congress, which began on January 3rd, 2021. Going back to the Dragon crew that splashed down, this Dragon crew launched just a couple of months before it at the end of May, and their first attempt to launch was delayed because of thunderstorms, thunder and lightning, which symbolized when Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. The launch got canceled 17 minutes before the scheduled launch time and then was rescheduled for 4 days later. The Dragon capsule and its Dragon crew were launched on what is known as the Falcon 9 rocket. That was another pairing of the numbers 9 and 17, and it was also one of the signs involving 17 minutes. Another example was the Cubs-Cleveland World Series in 2016 that went into Game 7 and then was tied at the end of 9 innings, and then there was the famous 17 minutes rain delay. Other videos explain how extremely prophetic the 2016 World Series was. Another example of a prophetic 17 minutes sign was the infamous 17 minutes of live footage posted on social media during the Christchurch, New Zealand mosque massacre. These instances of 17 minutes are pointing to the big 17 minutes in between the two planes that struck the two towers on 9/11, 17 minutes apart. It was the ultimate second witness sign. After the first plane struck the first tower, the world watched live and was confused as to whether it was terrorism or an accident. The world watched live and in horror as the second plane hit the second tower 17 minutes after the first tower, and then it was confirmed that it was an act of evil and terrorism. Thus, the ultimate second witness sign, which the Bible says is required to confirm a matter. And that's, by the way, what makes God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections true. That's being explained on this channel. It's these second and third and multiple witnesses confirming matters. Otherwise, these connections are just arbitrary and a product of one's creative imagination. And this is why, for example, Don Shula died at the age of 90 and is a pairing of 9 and 17. And then it's 90 days to the Dragon crew sign, which is also a pairing of 9 and 17, as I just explained, which is in turn 90 days to the day that Sean Connery died at the age of 90, who starred in the movie Rock, and then it was 220 days, which symbolizes Rock, to the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, and thus really commencing the end times period before the return of the Rock, Lord Jesus Christ, at the end of the end times period in the autumn of 2024. We have another third witness or another witness confirming all of this, and that is that it is exactly 400 days for this time span, this trail of signs, and the number 400 symbolizes the Antichrist. Because Pharaoh in Egypt, a type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Hebrews for 400 years. Another confirmation of this, by the way, is that this death of Don Shula at the age of 90 days before the Dragon crew, was also nine months exactly after the birthday of Barack Obama in 2019, the 44th president, on the day of the Indonesian blackout in Jakarta, where Obama grew up, that incurred 4 deaths. There was 4 deaths on the birthday of the 44th president, and that connects with other signs because, well, God's big picture of signs is an interconnected web, and when you try to explain it, you end up pulling the entire web, just explaining a little bit of it. But that, in turn, Obama's birthday was another 9 months after a football sign, which is why I'm explaining this, because it connects with Don Shula, the NFL coach. That 4th of the month date was November 4th, 2018, And that was the day of week 9 in the NFL schedule, when the New England Patriots, the most important sports team in God's signs, played the Packers. And the game was touted as the GOAT versus greatness. GOAT is Antichrist symbolism, and there's lots more to that. I won't go off onto the tangent, but the score was 31-17, and that's a pairing of 9 and 17 because it was week 9. And the reason for the 31 is because God is pointing to Isaiah chapter 31, which describes the Antichrist being vanquished at the end of the end times period. And so we have these signs with 31, 9, and 17. For example, this most recent Super Bowl, which was the 7th win out of 10 Super Bowls for Tom Brady, which hinted at the number 17 because the Antichrist is symbolized by the number 17 because the Antichrist will be vanquished on the Temple Mount on the 10th day of the 7th month, which hints at the number 17, and the beast and the dragon in the book of Revelation, which are symbolism for the Antichrist, has 10 heads and 7 horns, which also hints at the number 17. In ancient Israel, the Jews would conduct a ritual sacrifice involving a goat on the Temple Mount on the Day of Atonement. So anyway, this was the GOAT Super Bowl, and it hinted at the number 17, but the score was 31-9, which is another pairing of 31, 9, and 17. There was also the duck boat tragedy with 31 people on board, 17 drowned, and 9 of them were from the same family, and that was on the prophetic Table Rock Lake. Speaking of rock. But that's another amazing sign that is explained in other videos too. By the way, on the Day of Atonement in ancient Israel, the Jews would use goats in the ritual, as described in Leviticus chapter 23. And goat is Antichrist symbolism. And that's hinting at the 2 Antichrist goats and the Antichrist goat that will be vanquished from the Temple Mount at the return of Lord Jesus Christ in 2024 on the Day of Atonement. And so anyway, the reason for these signs involving the number 31, 17, and 9 is because God is communicating that the Antichrist described in Isaiah chapter 31 that is vanquished from the Temple Mount at the end of that chapter is revealed through the numbers 9 and 17. And that is Barack Obama, who was the president from 2009 until 2017 and was the senator from Illinois, arrived in Washington, D.C. in the 109th Congress and will return as the president in the 117th Congress. And a very big reason for going into all of this is that this chapter 31 in Isaiah begins with, "Woe to those who go down to Egypt." And again, in the Bible, Pharaoh in Egypt was a prophetic foreshadow or type for the Antichrist. And he persecuted the Jews in Egypt for 400 years. And so that's why from this game, this GOAT versus greatness game that Tom Brady played, that pointed to or had the combination of 31, 9, and 17 numbers, was exactly 9 months to the prophetic birthday of the 44th president, which in turn was 9 months to the death of Don Shula at the age of 90. So that brings us back to this diagram here. And then we have from the death of Don Shula, we have 400 days. And so that's confirmed anyways. That's my point, is that this death of Don Shula ties back to the Egyptian symbolism on the 4th of November in 2018. And then we have this here, 400 days Egyptian Antichrist symbolism to this very important prophetic Kamala Harris plane crash sign that's leading to the death of, to the day of, that she will die in a plane crash. And actually, since I went into all of that, I need to follow it up with this. The big reason for Don Shula here too is that, as I was explaining, his team in 1973 was the only team to ever go undefeated, and then they visited Barack Obama at the White House. After Obama's 85 Bears visited the White House, and the reason why they visited the White House is because that was the year that Obama moved to Chicago and began this 30-year cycle in which all of the major sports teams from Chicago won their championship, culminating with the Chicago Cubs breaking the curse of the Billy Goat. And they visited Obama, the 44th president, 4 days before he left office. So it was this complete 30-year cycle. And the 30 years is in the Bible symbolizing a king, in this case, the Antichrist king. Well, anyway, Don Shula was the coach of the Dolphins in the 85 Bears season, in the game which was the only game that the Bears lost, and preventing them from also having an undefeated season. And at the time, I was a Dolphins fan as a kid, and I recorded this game, and I didn't record anything else on the VCR. I just happened to record that game, and so that's a personal story, but I think it was all meant to be that that this was the case, because it provided all of this understanding that I'm about to explain. But this was in week 13. From the Bible, the number 13 symbolizes the Antichrist. As Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Ham. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 13th days of the months. And the two Antichrists described in the book of Revelation are described in Revelation chapter 13. And so number 13 symbolizes the Antichrist. And this game that the Dolphins defeated the Bears in was the only game that they lost in that season, a Monday night nationally televised game. It was week number 13, and the reason why they were able to defeat the Bears, which were unstoppable that year, and there's more to say about that. In fact, they were unstoppable because of their famous 46 defense. That was the title of their defense, and that's hinting at the 46th president through which the Antichrist will come to power. But they were unstoppable, but the only player that was able to stop them was the quick performing, pass-throwing quarterback for the Dolphins, player number 13. And in the season that the Dolphins won without losing a game, the Super Bowl, the MVP player was player number 13. And this was exceptional because this was a special teams player. It wasn't a position of football that normally you would even consider being an MVP player. But he was player number 13, and that he stood out because of his position as well. And then it was exactly 13 years after that, the Super Bowl, that the Bears won the 46 defense. So all of these 13s. Well, the day that the Chicago Bears visited Obama at the White House, I've given you the background now for how extremely prophetic the 85 Bears were. I'm probably forgetting some points, but the day they visited the White House was October 7th, which is 10/7. And God has used this date in other signs too, as second and third witnesses, confirming that this date symbolizes the Day of Atonement, which in the Hebrew calendar is the 10th day of the 7th month. Well, it just so happens that this 10/7 date in 2011 was the Day of Atonement in the Hebrew calendar. Not only was it 10/7 in the Gregorian calendar, which symbolizes the Day of Atonement, but it was also the Day of Atonement in the Hebrew calendar. And this day was exactly 13 years before the Day of Atonement in 2024, and the day that Barack Obama, the Antichrist, the GOAT Antichrist, will be vanquished from the Temple Mount at the return of Lord Jesus Christ on the day of the Lord in 2024 at his second coming. And so this was the big reason. All of this was confirmation that the second coming is in 2024. And so that's the reason for going into all of this, and that is the prophetic reason for the death of Don Shula at the age of 90 in this diagram. And so I'm glad I went into that to give you more understanding as to how important the death of Don Shula is and why it's all connecting here. All right. Well, one last thing in this video. When Kamala Harris dies, she will be replaced by the Antichrist, Barack Obama, who will overcome the 22nd Amendment, which restricts someone from being elected more than twice. He will be appointed instead through the 25th Amendment. He will be appointed vice president. And that's why it is exactly 25 years. Well, also the number 25 symbolizes the Jewish temple and the Temple Mount, which Bible prophecy says the Antichrist will rule in the end times period. And this is why exactly 25 years back from the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash was the release date of the movie The Rock in 1996, which is amazing. And that was just a few days, 7 days, after the movie Dragonheart was released. So that's quite a coincidence right there. The Rock and the Dragonheart, these two movies that tie in right here, were actually coincidentally released at the same time, 25 years before. And then 220 days, which symbolizes Rock, Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. It's beautiful.